Every single day, roughly 15 million Americans eat at a fast food restaurant. That is about 1 in every 7 people in this country, sitting down or more likely driving through to consume a meal that costs less than $10 and arrives in under 3 minutes. That number is staggering. And when you trace how it happened, how America built an entire food culture around speed and convenience, the story is far stranger and more fascinating than most people realize. In the next 10 minutes, you are going to discover how fast food went from a single roadside hot dog stand to a global industry worth over $330 billion. You will learn about the visionaries, the ruthless business decisions, the government policies, and the cultural shifts that made fast food not just a meal choice, but a defining feature of American identity. And here is what most food documentaries refuse to say out loud: fast food did not just respond to American culture. It actively shaped it in ways we are still reckoning with today. Let us go back to the beginning. The early 20th century in America was a country in motion. The automobile was transforming everything. By the 1920s, cars were no longer a luxury for the wealthy. Henry Ford's assembly line had made them accessible to the working and middle class, and suddenly, Americans were driving to work, to leisure, to the edges of cities that were expanding rapidly. Roads were being paved. Suburbs were being born. And people needed to eat on the go. The first concept that resembles what we now call fast food appeared in the form of diners and lunch counters, which had existed since the late 1800s. But the true turning point came in 1921, when White Castle opened its first location in Wichita, Kansas. Founded by Walter Anderson and Edgar Waldo Ingram, White Castle introduced something revolutionary: a standardized, repeatable product. The small square hamburger, the clean white building, the consistent price. It was 5 cents a burger. White Castle was the first chain in America to prove that food could be manufactured with industrial precision and sold to the masses at volume. But here is what nobody talks about: White Castle also had to fight a cultural battle that its founders never anticipated. In the early 1920s, ground beef had a terrible reputation. Americans associated hamburgers with questionable meat and unsanitary conditions. White Castle countered this directly by designing their restaurants to look like small castles, using white tile and stainless steel to signal cleanliness. They even published pamphlets encouraging women to buy hamburgers for their families. It worked. They did not just sell food. They rehabilitated an entire food category. The 1930s brought the Great Depression, which paradoxically helped cement fast food's place in American life. When money was scarce, cheap, filling food became essential. Drive-in restaurants began appearing across the South and Southwest, where cars were most prevalent. Car hops, often young women on roller skates, brought food directly to vehicles. These drive-ins were social hubs, not just eating spots. Then came the 1940s and the transformation accelerated. In 1948, Richard and Maurice McDonald, two brothers from New Hampshire who had been running a moderately successful drive-in in San Bernardino, California, made a radical decision. They shut down their restaurant entirely for 3 months and reopened with what they called the speedy service system. They eliminated most of their menu. They got rid of the car hops. They created an assembly line kitchen where every worker had one specific job. A hamburger, fries, and a drink could be prepared in seconds. The price of a hamburger dropped to 15 cents. Lines formed around the block. The McDonald brothers had essentially applied Henry Ford's assembly line logic to food production, and it was a revolution hiding in plain sight. Their restaurant became the template for everything that followed. But the McDonald brothers were not businessmen at heart. They were operators. They had no grand vision of national expansion. That vision belonged to a 52-year-old milkshake machine salesman named Ray Kroc, who visited their San Bernardino location in 1954 and immediately understood what he was looking at. Kroc convinced the brothers to let him franchise the concept, and in 1955, he opened his first McDonald's franchise in Des Plaines, Illinois. By 1961, Kroc bought out the McDonald brothers entirely for $2.7 million, a deal the brothers would later call the worst of their lives, as the company eventually became worth hundreds of billions. Kroc's genius was not the food. It was the system. He created strict operational standards that ensured a McDonald's in Ohio would taste identical to one in Arizona. He built a franchising model that allowed rapid expansion with minimal corporate capital. And he understood real estate in a way that most food historians overlook. McDonald's was as much a real estate company as a restaurant chain, owning the land beneath its franchised locations and leasing it back to operators. The 1950s and 1960s were the golden era of fast food expansion. Burger King launched in 1954. Kentucky Fried Chicken, under the charismatic Colonel Harlan Sanders, began franchising aggressively in 1952. Wendy's arrived in 1969. Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, Subway, all emerged within a 20-year window. This was not coincidence. The Interstate Highway System, signed into law by President Eisenhower in 1956, physically created the infrastructure that fast food needed to survive. Highways meant exits. Exits meant clusters of restaurants. The relationship between American road infrastructure and fast food is one of the most underappreciated stories in business history. The 1970s brought a new challenge, and here is a number that should stop you cold. By 1970, Americans were spending $6 billion a year on fast food. By 1980, that number had exploded to $30 billion. The industry grew fivefold in a single decade. This growth coincided with massive social changes. More women were entering the workforce than at any previous point in American history. Dual-income households had less time to cook. Fast food did not create this reality, but it positioned itself perfectly to serve it. Marketing became the weapon of choice during this era. McDonald's introduced Ronald McDonald in 1963, and by the 1970s and 1980s, the brand was targeting children with unprecedented precision. Happy Meals launched in 1979. The Golden Arches became one of the most recognized symbols on Earth. A study in the early 2000s found that 96% of American schoolchildren could identify Ronald McDonald, a recognition rate second only to Santa Claus. The fast food industry had successfully embedded itself into childhood memory and loyalty in ways that would pay dividends for decades. But here is what nobody talks about: the health consequences were becoming visible at the very same time the industry was celebrating its triumphs. By the 1990s, obesity rates in America were climbing sharply. Nutritional researchers began drawing direct lines between the high-calorie, high-sodium, high-fat content of fast food and chronic disease. Eric Schlosser's 2001 book Fast Food Nation brought these critiques to a mainstream audience and became a cultural flashpoint. The industry pushed back hard, funding its own research and lobbying against nutritional regulations. The 21st century forced the fast food industry to evolve or face serious consequences. Chains began adding salads, fruit options, and calorie counts to menus, often under regulatory pressure. New York City mandated calorie labeling in 2008, a policy that eventually went national under the Affordable Care Act. Consumer demand shifted, at least partially, toward fresher ingredients and transparency about sourcing. The rise of fast casual dining, chains like Chipotle and Shake Shack that positioned themselves as higher quality alternatives, disrupted the traditional fast food model and forced giants like McDonald's and Burger King to reformulate core products and renovate restaurant designs. McDonald's removed artificial preservatives from McNuggets. Burger King eliminated artificial colors and flavors. The pressure from consumers was real, and the industry responded. Today, the American fast food industry employs roughly 3.7 million workers, making it one of the largest employment sectors in the country. It operates across every demographic, every geography, and every income level. It has exported American food culture to over 100 countries. And it continues to generate enormous debate about labor rights, environmental impact, and public health. Before you go, if you learned something valuable today, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Flavor Vault for a brand new video every single day. We will see you in the next one.